the story of this individual is very important, no, in that is really quite intriguing, looking at his origin, where it's coming from, looking at the position of the church, looking at the position that he came to occupy, and looking at the condition of his death. And now, looking at the document that we can find today to tell his story. How simple are these things, no? I mean, if he was sick and he died, and if he was popularly loved, maybe there could have been a lot of documentation about him. What I'm trying to say here is that there are even the opinion of other or the conclusion of other that his story have actually deliberately been wiped out so that we don't know a lot about him. I don't know if that is what you find, or it was very easy for you to find all the evidence you were looking to construct your story. Help me with that.
Well, I think certainly it's true that Alessandro was very much painted as the bad guy quite quickly on by the historians who worked for the later members of the Medici family. And I think what happens in this period in the 1530s is that the Medici go from pretending really that they are just the most prominent family in a republican system of government. So, a system like in Italy today, there is no monarch. There is a system of elections, not as broad and democratic a system as there is now, but certainly some system of electing the rulers, in which the Medici just kind of operated by being oligarchs who pulled strings, but not by being the hereditary dukes. And in the 1530s, they basically make themselves, with the patronage of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and his military backing, so a foreign ruler from the Italian point of view, they make themselves pretty much the kind of absolute rulers of the city. So they really make any sense of elections pretty meaningless. Alessandro is in charge. And his successor members of the Medici family will be in charge. Now, making that change of government, essentially the regime change, is not a popular thing to do. It basically involves bringing in foreign military backing, building a massive fort in the city to make sure you get your way and you can control any potential rebellions. It's a pretty brutal process. It involves a siege of the city, which is not over months, in which people are effectively, being starved if they don't agree to give in. So this is a very brutal process by which the Medici make themselves absolute Dukes of Florence. Now, in that context, it becomes convenient later on to blame Alessandro for all the bad things that were done and say that was kind of about him personally. I mean, it wasn't really about him personally. No Renaissance ruler ever gets there by being a nice guy. It was a family strategy in which he was one player, and he went along with it. But I think, there is a process of, sometimes it's about, clearly a lot of his papers disappear. We don't know where they went, but it's also not just about saying he wasn't there, but saying that, well, a lot of bad things happened when the Medici became dukes, but they were all Alessandro's fault personally, because he was a tyrant. He was individually a bad guy. And also bringing in his background and his heritage, saying that on account of his mother, who was enslaved or who was mixed race, or the various different versions of what exactly is said about his mother, but basically suggesting that he was unsuitable to rule. And especially as you go later on, you come forward to the 19th century, when you see historians talking about this, they make quite an explicit connection between Alessandro's race and him being a bad ruler. So there's lots of different things going on here. At the time, in the 16th century, they tend not to make such a sharp connection between race and rulership. But as you come forward, the historians, and writing in the context of so-called sort of scientific racism later on in the 19th and into the 20th century, they absolutely do that. So there's a lot of unpicking to do of understanding how his story was subsequently written and how that relates to what might have really happened back in the 1530s when he was actually in charge of a city.
And it's not like if we talk about it, we will definitely just rewrite the story in turn it upside down. That's not the intention. The intention is that we are human beings, and as human beings, let's begin to talk about our experience, who we are, where we are coming from, what have we done. The reason for this is so that we can learn, because we need to learn. No? If we don't learn from history, then we continue to repeat the same error. Now, just like the Medici, Alessandro de Medici, there are many other Africans influences in Europe, whom, unfortunately, we don't happen to read about because sometimes they are deliberately written off. Or maybe, like you were saying before, is because of this erroneous connection between race and be bad. So if we identify the person's history, seeing that he is not a typical European of a person, so we have a way of painting the person to be bad, even though you have done something good, then we just look for a way to write the person off. Of course, this is a very complicated story. We both know that because it's a guy that was assassinated in his position. It's not that he jumped from somewhere he was also representing authority, the power that be as it were. So how does this become an issue? So help me explain that better, please.
Yeah, I think, well, a part of it is that, the way that the Medici family get power back in Florence. So they've been kicked out of Florence 3 years earlier in 1527. There's a rebellion. People in Florence decide that they don't want the Medici in power anymore. They feel that they've started to exceed their power beyond what they ought to have, that they're not ruling very legitimately. And so there's an uprising and the Medici flee into exile. So when Alessandro comes along, as a very young, probably around about the kind of 18, 19, 20, as the Medici family are trying to get back into power, because the Medici use the support primarily of the Spanish army, and because what they do is they arrange a marriage between Alessandro and an illegitimate daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who's also the King of Spain, Alessandro is perceived as coming into Florence really as a person who is only there by virtue of the fact that he has this foreign military support. So he is, in that sense, yes, he's a member of the Medici family, and yes, that is a Florentine family, though he's an illegitimate member of the family. So his parents weren't married. We don't know quite who his mother is. His father is supposed to be Duke Lorenzo de' Medici, but some people say it's actually the Pope, Clement VII. So there's lots of questions about his own legitimacy personally within the family, about the fact that he comes in really and is placed in power with this external military support that is not from Florence itself. And people accept his rule, but they don't accept his rule really to some extent because they're a little bit worn out of constant wars and fighting.